In this episode of Risk First Stars of Software, I'm joined by Agile legend and programming pragmatist extraordinaire, Dave Thomas. For people who don't know Dave, he's a software legend who I first became aware with his book, The Pragmatic Programmer, which he wrote with Andrew Hunt in 1999, and which has been sitting on my bookshelf for these last 2 decades. He's an original signatory of the Agile Manifesto, which really helped set a new trajectory for software development from the turn of the century onwards. And he's an author of multiple other books about programming, especially unit testing, Ruby, Rails, and a new book called Simplicity, published just last year, which we'll definitely be talking about later. He founded the Pragmatic Bookshelf with the goal of improving the lives of software developers, which has published around 200 different titles since the early 2000s across a diverse range of topics from AI, the web, programming languages of all kinds, data science, and a whole series on brain twisters, far too many to list. And the Pragmatic Bookshelf has just published the second edition of my own book, Risk First Software Development. Not an easy process, but Dave's team did an excellent job all the way along. And finally, you may have seen Dave talking about Agile or Ruby at GoTo, RubyConf or RailsConf, any number of conferences where he talks eloquently about trends in software development, which I'm sure we're going to get to in detail today. So, Dave, thanks for coming on the podcast and welcome. I'm sure I missed a bunch of things there. Anything you'd like to add?
Superhero. No, I mean, I didn't recognize myself from that. That was very nice. Thank you.
It's nice to have a proper conversation with you after all of our interactions on the Risk First book, but also just because of that long history of you writing the Pragmatic Programmer right back when I first started software development. I read that. And so,
nice. So when you say it's been on your shelf for 20 years, it makes me think, well, you should go and open it, Yeah. And I got to say, I'm really excited because we initially talked about your Risk First book. I don't know, was it 2 years ago now or something? Yeah. And I was really excited by that at the time. And I kind of championed that through the editorial process because it was, I think, a really useful take on the vagaries of software development.
Well, yeah, so this is the Risk First podcast. So what I wanted to do today is to try and draw some parallels between, the ideas of the Pragmatic Programmer and some of the other ideas that you've had in your career. And, bookended really by your other book on simplicity just last year. And see if we can draw some parallels there, because I think we're both kind of reaching for some of the same things along the way. So yeah, you're right to call me out. I have actually pulled it off the bookshelf and had a look through it. And I remember it really well. I think I read it a couple of times when I first got it, but I think a lot of it's still stuck with me. So some of the ideas like don't repeat yourself and the power of plain text and things like that, and just the idea of pragmatism itself. Are you pleased with? Have you read it recently? Are you pleased with how well it's kind of stood the test of time?
Well, I had to read it recently because in 2019, I guess that's not recent, 2019, we had to produce a second edition to celebrate the 20th anniversary. So I read through it then, and it's actually sounded surprising. It has stood the test of time. There are individual references to things that like no longer exist, and they got updated. But the underlying principles, I think, are at least currently universal. I'll tell you something really interesting. I got invited to speak, actually next week, I think, at a conference in Japan about the impact of AI on agility. Mm-hmm. And they wanted me to do a talk on how much of the Pragmatic Programmer book is now irrelevant because of AI. And so as a result, I did actually read through it, or skim through it at least, over the last couple of weeks. And the amazing thing is, it's all still relevant.
Yeah.
So
just to kind of undercut the talk you're about to do, so spoilers for them. But I agree with you. I think, well, that was going to be one of my questions today, was to talk about exactly that. A lot of what you're talking about in the book, I kind of see as being about like de-risking in a way. And like you're trying to pull out areas which are high risk. So like the idea of the power of plain text is trying to set in place file formats that aren't going to go out of date and that you're not going to end up in the future not being able to read back again or something like that. Or, in a crisis where you need to understand something in a debug file, can you read it? So yeah, that sort of stuff seems completely relevant in the world of AI, where we have like coding engines that are spewing out vast amounts of code. Are we going to be able to understand this later on? That seems to me to be a critical question that both, the pragmatic programmer and the idea of simplicity both talk to.
Well, I think it's the thing that unites both of our books is, I think it's just one word, and that's feedback. I think that risk mitigation is a question of deciding how to measure what could go wrong and putting in place mechanisms to try and stop that, or at least to ameliorate that. And if you look through the Pragmatic Programmer, I would say that every tip in there has an element of feedback about it, because feedback is how, well, it's how you know you're going in the right direction. But it's really the only way to be, quote, agile, right? It's the only way you can, it's like, imagine you were like, blindfolded walking through, like, I don't know, over a plank over a canyon or something, right? You're not just going to go, okay, I know it's this direction, and just march happily forward, right? No, you're going to sit there and take small steps and feel around and see where you are. And, I'm too close to the edge. I'm going to go back this way a bit. That's feedback. And that's how you make progress. That's how you're agile.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I spend a lot of time in Risk First talking about that, coming up with the big plan up front and stuff. In a way, that was what Agile was reacting against, was like trying to build something in advance without the feedback, and it played into the hands of like consultancies who are able to then charge you for that big thing that they've designed, and all that kind of stuff. But it kind of, you're right. A lot of programming is about being in on a mountain track and in the dark and not knowing where you're going. It feels a lot like that. I'm going to just pull out a few things from the original Pragmatic Programmer, because there's things that like stuck with me over the years. One that I use still all the time is the stone soup metaphor. Do you want? Actually, I'll let you describe what that is.
Well, the original story, just really briefly, is that back in some medieval times, a group of soldiers were coming home from the war. They were hungry. They were tired. They came across a village that was also ravaged by the war. They had very little. But the soldiers desperately needed to eat. So they found a pot, and they put it on a fire with some water and added a stone to it. And the villagers came up and said, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh, we're making stone soup. It's delicious. You just watch." And the villagers went, "That's it, just water and a stone." And they went, "Yep, absolutely." And they just stood there and watched the water boil. And the villagers couldn't resist. And they kept saying, "Well, surely there must be more to it than that." And they said, no, it's not so. I mean, it is a bit better if you put some potatoes in it, but, and someone said, "Oh, I got potatoes." And they ran off, and, they gave some potatoes, and they threw the potatoes in, and then, sat there and watched it for a while. And they said, "Oh, and carrots." The villagers said, "I got some carrots," ran off and got it. And eventually each of the villagers who'd been hoarding one particular food went and contributed this food into this stone soup. And so after however long it was, the soldiers took the stone out of the soup, and then everybody had a really delicious stew. And there's kind of two morals to that, which are kind of interesting. One is that it's really easy to get fooled by your curiosity. And it's something to look out for, is, the kind of like, it's almost like the teaser offer, to get you involved, and then you get more drawn in. And I mean, we see so much of that nowadays with, "You won't believe point number 5, that kind of. But there's another side to it as well. And that is that by tricking them, the soldiers actually helped the villagers. Because as it stood, everybody had, like, somebody had a pile of carrots, someone had a pile of potatoes. But until the soldiers came along, they weren't going to combine those and make something good out of them. So part of the moral there is you really have to kind of get started, and then people will come along with you.
Yeah, that's right. And the reason I wanted to talk about this was because, I mean, I work in open source now. I work for the Linux Foundation. And I kind of feel like open source is the absolute epitome of the stone soup thing. A lot of what I'm doing in my job is like, I'll go and write a few commits, and then people will see that and get started and think, "Oh, this would be only so much better if it had X, Y, and Z." And I kind of feel like that is almost the selfish, but it's self-organizing as well. And it's that kind of way that open source works is like the epitome of stone soup, because you don't even lose your vegetables. You maybe lose some time, but you're contributing something to the common good, but you get to keep it as well. Did you have
you seen that YouTube video of there's this group of people sitting on a hillside? I think they're listening to a band or something, and everyone's just sitting there on their blankets watching. And then one guy gets up and starts dancing. And, he dances for like a minute, and then gradually people join in, and suddenly the entire hillside's dancing. That's it. That's
Yeah, I'm honestly trying to aspire to that all the time at work and in the projects that I'm doing. Did you actually have open source in mind when you were writing that? Because it feels like that. I guess there was open source going on, but it feels like that might have been. It's kind of maybe not so apparent as it is today. It's not such a huge deal.
To be honest, no. I hadn't actually drawn that parallel. I think it was just inspired by. The whole section there is kind of dealing with the blank page of paper and how you get started and how you motivate people, and it's just part of that overall. Someone's got to do it. It's got to get started somehow. And that's what you do.
Yeah, interesting. Because it's I think it's definitely so applicable to computing. Just in general, the idea of rolling up your sleeves and getting started is really a problem we always face in software. The first person to start something. It's the first guy dancing.
We have two problems. We have getting started and stopping.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I know all about that second one. I've got so many projects that I just cannot let go of.
Yep.
And the other thing, so you've already talked about like feedback loops, right? Which I think is a big part of it, like the traceability stuff. That was something that stuck with me as well. But that idea of feedback almost presaged the whole Agile thing, didn't it? Because the whole Agile movement is based on feedback. You don't talk about, I don't think you mention Agile in the Pragmatic Programmer, but it seems like there's a straight line from there to what.
Well, you remember we predated the Agile movement by a couple of years. So we didn't mention it because our crystal ball was broken at the time. But I think that's part of the reason that we were actually at Snowbird, is because our ideas, some of them implicit, aligned with those of the other people that went, and I think that's why what came out of there was very heavily feedback-based, as you say.
You were at Snowbird in Utah for this, right? I was there 2 weeks ago for the Linux Foundation conference. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we were originally we were going to go to some island in the Caribbean. This was, I think it was in January or February, and we thought that's not going to go down very well with the families if we're all going to a Caribbean island. So Alistair Coburn lived in Utah, so we switched to Snowbird.
I'm surprised you got anything done. Honestly, it's about 2 miles high, isn't it? And there was some meetings that I had while I was there where I just couldn't think of anything straight. It was really hard work. But it was very beautiful. What I'm interested in is like, how did it become a manifesto? Like this, it seems like it's been an amazing like marketing thing that's really stood the test of time. But how did you guys come up with that way to sell it? I'm interested in the genesis of that.
So the people that were involved, everybody had their own take on what we were doing. I mean, I guess Andy and I, you could say, excuse me, had, the Pragmatic Programmer behind us. Everybody had some kind of consultancy business, or they were working in a company where they did things in a certain, quote, agile way. And so everybody had their own implementation plan, if you like. So the very first thing we had to do was to work out what was in common between us. So the first morning we spent basically thrashing out the ideas that were important to us across all of these different approaches. We broke for lunch, and Martin Fowler and I ended up just chatting about, how we could express this. And one of us, I can't remember who, says something about, well, really it's a question of choice. It's a question of, do you do this or you do that? And that struck us as being a really interesting formulation because it wasn't prescriptive. It was just saying you have a choice. And so we decided to try documenting our choices. So we basically wrote down, we have come to prefer A over B, so it would be, delivering working software over, I can't remember what it was now, contracts and negotiation or something. And we started out, and it was really interesting. All of the points that people had raised in the morning, we could express. I think at the time we had 5 A over B things. And people kind of gradually milled around and had a look at what we were doing. And in fact, if you look at the background picture on the Agile Manifesto website, with all the people standing around a whiteboard, that's that moment.
Is that why they're standing around?
Yeah.
I've always wondered about
that. And we took that list and probably spent no more than half an hour refining it. We got rid of one of the items, and everybody asked me which one we got rid of. And I can't remember. It's not in my notes. But we got it down to those 4. And we spent the rest of the afternoon crafting the overall thing. And we came up with basically a statement. And we had the room book for 3 days. So we spent the rest of the time doing the kind of the other stuff, the practices and things. But to my mind, we'd finished at the end of day 1. And we all thought, okay, that's kind of cool. And Ward Cunningham and I, mostly Ward, put together a website. And it was his idea. We didn't know what to call what we'd done, and we talked about this a lot. And in the end, we liked the idea of a manifesto because we were basically trying to change people's values, what they believed. And so we thought manifesto is the right word for that. So Ward went and registered agilemanifesto.org, I guess, and he and I put together the website. And his brilliant idea was to have a space where people could just say, yes, I agree with this, and put their name. And we then we had the ability, the site would then list the names of all of the people that had agreed. And we put the site up, and kind of that was it. We weren't that, we did it. We finished. And Ward emailed me after a week and said, we got over 1,000 people. And from there on, I don't think people were talking about things going viral, but it went viral. And so we got to 10,000 and 50,000, and it just grew and grew and grew. And so over the next couple of years, I guess, it just took off. So we didn't plan it. There was no, you say it was marketing. Nothing, not at all like that. It was just, I think, the right words at the right time,
Yeah, so lightning in a bottle kind of situation, really. Yeah. You say it was a whiteboard, but I think when I first saw that, I'd just been watching Pulp Fiction or something, and it looks like on the picture, I think it's Martin Fowler, it looks like he's pulling like gold out of a briefcase or something. It's kind of a murky picture. It's all like, so I thought there's some kind of like agile object being conjured out of.
I see. Yeah.
But on further reflection, it's just an interesting piece of lighting, I think. But it does look like he's got some kind of glowing orb or something that he's conjuring from
holding up little baby Agile for.
Yeah, sort of like a nativity in a way, isn't it? Yeah, fantastic. Well, obviously that website's still there. I wonder if did they close down the signatory thing, or is that still going?
I don't know.
It'd be interesting to know how many people have either signed it or tried to sign it since then.
Yeah, to be honest with you, in my head, once we'd done that, I kind of moved on.
Right.
Because it didn't really change very much of what I wanted to do. We were consulting, I guess. So there was, we were talking to people about how to do things that way. But we were also about to enter, there was a really bad kind of software development recession in the early 2000s.
Yes, of course, because of the .com bust, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we had the millennium bug, and that was all great, and everyone was making lots of money, and then suddenly
So basically, the bottom dropped out of consultancy for a while, which is why we started the bookshelf. But either way, it wasn't that impactful on me, and I was watching with a little bit of disgust as the ideas behind agility started to get commercialized. And we had, and I mean, some of the people in that room actually encouraged, well, a lot of them did, because to be honest with you, it was really good for business. And if I was a decent business person, I would probably have jumped on that bandwagon too. But yeah, it kind of, for about 4 or 5 years, it was golden. It was people who came across it said, this looks like a good idea, we'll try it. And they tried it, they adapted it, they talked about it. Absolutely fantastic. But after maybe 2008, 9, 10, right about there, it kind of became dogmatic. And it became ritualized. There were consultancies that moved in and told you how to be agile, which is absolutely crazy. Because you can't tell someone how to be agile. All you can do is tell them the things they have to think about while they're doing what they're doing. But that's not prescriptive. That's a description of what you have to do. It's like you can't write a book on how to be a ballerina.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess along with that is the like agile roles in like the Scrum Master and all this kind of thing, or like the certification programs that sort of sprung up alongside all this. Well, so from my perspective, like working in finance, although you say like it kind of, the rails came off in about 2010, this hadn't really impacted finance at all. Not from my perspective. Like there were lots of people in finance who'd heard of Agile, but the idea that we would actually build any software that way was completely alien, because the people running the projects at the top level were just not learning about this kind of stuff and were not bought into it. It took a whole nother generation for that to change. But I think, yeah, by that stage, all of this kind of stuff had probably played out in most of the consultancy world.
Although, I mean, I've been talking to people actually in the UK banking industry, and I am quite surprised at they have embraced agility, but they're doing it kind of right. I mean, there's a few shops that are doing the kind of like, we'll pay the £2 million to get ourselves a manual, and then that's what we'll do. But the best ones are actually doing really well at adapting the ideas behind agility to what they do.
Yes, I think we've been very late to this party, but because of that lateness, in a way, we've been able to observe things going wrong in other places. Having said that, I think I'm on record as having been on some pretty terrible agile projects in the past, so it doesn't always go right. But
I mean, basically, any project that calls itself agile is not, and that's
yeah.
I mean, for a start, agile is not a noun, right? So you can't do agile, but nothing in the manifesto tells people how to do things. All it is a set of values, And so when people say, if you want to do agile, you have to have daily stand-ups, right? You have to have retrospectives. You have to have unit tests. You have to have this. No, you don't. None of that applies. What you have to do is to look at what you're doing, see what's working, change it, see if it works better or worse. And that's it. That's the entire sum total of agility.
Yeah, because going back to that idea of the feedback loops that you were talking about earlier, right? If you think about like some of the terms in the Agile Manifesto, like individuals and interactions over processes and tools, like the idea of quick feedback loops is much more apparent in that left-hand side, the individuals and interactions, than in the processes and tools, right? Processes are hard to change. Tools are often impossible to change. So you have no recourse to a feedback loop in the same way as you do with the idea of individuals and interactions. So it kind of, I think you're right. It is kind of that idea of feedback is baked into it. And the idea of short feedback loops is kind of what the Agile Manifesto's striving at, really, isn't it? With those statements.
And also kind of like nested feedback loops. So you can actually have feedback loops in the order of seconds and feedback loops in the order of months, and that's good.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's interesting to look at also is if you look at the way companies are traditionally structured, they are a mixture of 19th century military structure and beginning of the century, last century, Taylorism, scientific management, where the idea is not how do you get feedback, but how do you disseminate one person's will down through a group of people. As armies became bigger and bigger, they had to work out how do you issue a command and have it implemented all the way down, right? And that's why you had this breakdown into groups of 8 to 20 people, and they all control, each one of those controls another group of 8 to 20 people, and down.
Yeah.
And combine that with scientific management, which is we define the job up front and we set up parameters and we reward you for following those parameters. You end up with industry, basically business, the way it works.
Yeah.
And even in the military now, they say that's not the way to do it. If you look at branches of the military that have to be reactive, that have to be, quote, agile, like special forces, like the Marines, all of these are actually decentralized now, where there is no central command. Well, there's something called commander's intent, which is you say, gosh, it would be really nice if we took that hill, but you don't just say, I want to take that hill. You say why you want to take that hill. You say, if we had that hill, then we would have a commanding view over this so we could do that. Because knowing why you want to do something affects the decisions you make doing it, right? So, I mean, one solution to we want to take that hill is you drop a bunker buster on it and the entire hill explodes and it won't be there anymore. And guess what? You've taken it. But that doesn't achieve the underlying objective, which is we needed a commanding position to look over the thing. So they do that. They say, it would be very nice if we could do this because ... And then the individual people on the ground work out how to do it.
Yes.
And that is, to me, the essence of agility.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that flies in the face of like that top-down hierarchical structure.
Oh, absolutely.
The more you impose like a structure on an organization, the less opportunity there is for people to like color outside the lines and figure out how they're going to solve the problems on their own. And another thing that I took away from the Pragmatic Programmer all those years ago was that you had this very short section on like delighting the user, and how you shouldn't just aim for completing a task. You should aim to try and delight the other person. And this is something that I've kind of feel like has carried on with me throughout my career, where I'm always trying to, it's almost like a magic trick where you're trying to, you're going to say, yes, I've done this for you, but also, like here's the prestige. There's the thing that you didn't ask for that I knew that you wanted already. And I kind of feel like that's something I've strived for a number of times, but at the same time, it rarely goes down that well in those kind of top-down hierarchical organizations. Sometimes people will observe that and think, oh, Rob's doing something a bit interesting here, but quite a lot of the time I'm just the square peg that doesn't fit in the round hole.
Well, that means that the hole's the wrong shape. I mean, okay, yes, I agree. And if you think about, who was the master, right? Who was the undisputed master of delivering just that one extra thing?
I'm not sure.
I am thinking of Steve Jobs.
Okay, yes, yeah? Just one more thing. Yeah.
Just one more thing.
Example.
But it's not just that, right? When you think about when the very first time you opened an Apple product, right? I don't know about you, but I was just blown away by the packaging and how much thought had gone into the packaging. And then I opened the packaging up, and the first thing that faced me was some kind of greeting to say, welcome. And it managed to get across like what was inside, what you had to do with it without actually telling you, you take that apart and everything was wrapped so beautifully and it was clear that they cared. And that probably added, 0.5% to the cost of the product. But from the customer experience, it was just phenomenal. It made you it made you feel that you made the right decision.
Yes, no, that's very true. Yeah, and I think actually, the last thing I wanted to say on this was that if you keep on trying to do that in your career, that kind of almost becomes like you're pushing yourself, aren't you? And it becomes like a superpower to actually to be able to think about the user in those respects and then deliver these extra things. So it's it works both ways, right? It's good advice, not just for the short term, but also for the long term.
But you know what? Well, as you said that, it occurred to me that there's one really important thing that I've never thought of before, and that is if you are thinking about what extra little thing could I throw in here to delight them? Then as you're thinking about that, what you're really doing is putting yourself into their shoes and looking at it from their side, right? Which is kind of what you should be doing anyway with everything you do.
Yeah.
And so in a way, thinking about the little bit of icing on the cake actually improves the cake as well.
Yeah. Well, I think so. We're kind of getting into like the value almost of empathy within like what we're doing, and that kind of brings me on to like your simplicity book, right? So if I like bookend what you've done, you started with the Pragmatic Programmer, which is kind of a lot of practices around reducing risk in the actual job of like getting software built, whereas simplicity, at least from what I've seen of it, seems to be more like taking a wider view and saying, we've got all these organizations and we've got people in the organizations and they're all doing things to each other and to products and code. And now we need to consider like the human factors and how and what practices we can bring to bear on that. And I think empathy is one of the things you bring up in there, right?
Well, yeah, empathy is a form of feedback when you think about it. In that, if you're empathetic, what you're actually trying to do is to use the cues you're given from interacting with someone to work out what it is they need or what it is they're thinking. So you're trying to project yourself into them, which is, I think, a vital part of communication. Empathy is kind of what makes things work. It really is the lubricant of society. And I think having a little bit more empathy nowadays would not hurt at all.
No,
but it's not just for people. It's the really interesting thing. I know people who have zero mechanical empathy. And so when something goes wrong, they'll do the wildest, craziest, stupidest things, mostly to do with venting their anger than actually getting the thing working. Whereas somebody who has mechanical empathy will quite often like pick the thing up and turn it around in their hands a few times and maybe, twist or put a bit of torque on something, whatever else, and come to understand how the thing does what it does and therefore what's likely to go wrong. So I think having that kind of ability to project yourself into something else, whether it's a person or an animal or a machine, is really important. And one thing I have found that really has surprised me, I'm doing a fair amount of coding with AI at the moment. Right. And I've experimented. If I am nice to Claude, Claude does better. It's saying please and thank you and having little side conversations really improves it. And I think the reason is that what it's doing is it's building this context the whole time, right? And if you make the context have a kind of positive vibe to it, then it's more likely to say, in a way, it's going to sound really crazy, but it kind of feels safer for it to get involved and say no without being...
so like psychological safety kind of thing.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You're giving it the latitude to make mistakes and try things out.
So I've got to tell you something. I had the other day, I was having it summarize something for me, and it summarized it, but it had the traditional too many M dashes in it. So I just went, I just typed ***, M dash question mark. That's what I typed. And it got, oh, you got me. M dash won't do it again. I am convinced that was a joke.
Yeah, well, I think it knows, but it will do it again at some point.
Oh, I know it will. I know it will.
It's gonna come back. So just going back to the empathy thing. So,
sorry.
No, we're going to talk about AI a bit as well, I think, today. But so I want to have your feedback on this. So you talked about people who've got like that mechanical empathy and then personal empathy, like different things. And I think like the risk first, because this is a risk first podcast, so I have to talk about risk. But one of the things I talk about is building an internal model. And for my money, right, what you're, there's two different internal models there. You've got your internal model of a machine or a system or whatever the gadget is, and you've got the internal model of the person you're dealing with, maybe your client or the person who's asking you for stuff. And so it's a question of trying to build that internal model of or even of the general, right, who's asking you to go and take it hell. What you're trying to build an internal model of what he's trying to achieve, and then deliver to that internal model. And so, yeah, trying these things out, like putting something in front of people and saying, "Oh, and I also did this." It's kind of it's a way of testing that internal model, maybe
Exactly.
both in the short term or the long term.
That's that's a really interesting observation, because what you're really doing by doing that is you are getting feedback on your own understanding, because you're doing something they didn't ask for based on what you thought. And so you're actually, I had never thought of it that way. You're right. Thank you.
But yeah, so yeah. Actually, and the other thing I wanted to just say on this topic, which I've kind of been riffing on a few times this last couple of weeks, especially in like Snowbird the other week, was how much, well, I don't think this is true of all software developers, but certainly I kind of see it as like a lot of the people I work with are performers. And naturally, a lot of them are into dance, and certainly a lot of them talk at conferences and things. And I kind of feel like there's like a performance element to what we're doing as well. So that whole idea that it's maybe a bit like a magic trick, I think that's probably one of the things that I enjoy most about software developing, especially like when I'm at a conference. I can just the demo goes right for once, and you get to show somebody, that's always it always feels like a massive, like, whipping the tablecloth off the table and everything's still standing up afterwards kind of moment. What do you think? I mean, you talk a lot of conferences as well, so does that sort of ring any bells for you?
I think one of the things I've noticed is that an inordinate number of software developers are also musicians.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So in any team of, say, 10 people, there's probably 2 or 3 good musicians of some instrument or other. I always remember being at a conference. I can't remember where it was. I think it was Australia. And we had Chad Fowler, Kent Beck, I can't remember, a couple other people, and Sam Aaron. Have you come across Sam Aaron?
No, I don't know him.
Okay, he's a Brit who is famous for doing some software called Sonic Pi, which is really cool music generation software, which he's actually revved it now, and it's not called Sonic Pi anymore, and I can't remember the new name. But it allowed it's you can write programs that generate the music and then mutate them, and as you change them, the music changes. But it also acts as a sampler. So he was up on stage with Chad, and I mean, Chad plays professional saxophone. Kent Beck is a really good guitarist, and all these people were up on stage playing around, and they hadn't rehearsed, they just like started playing. And then Sam was sitting in the background quietly sampling them, and then eventually started joining in. And the whole experience was magical. It really was.
Yeah, I bet.
And so, yes to performance, definitely yes to performance. But I think also there is something to the music thing that is appealing as well. And I think maybe it's to me, one of the essences of a software developer. You talk about having that empathy for lots of different things at the same time. The thing that software developers do, which is not, I think, something you can teach, is that they can look at all of those different perspectives and find things in common and join the dots, if you like, in a way that makes sense. And in a way, when you're producing music, that's what you're doing. You have these ideas in your head, but you've only got so many notes you can use, And so you're trying to find ways of expressing what you want to express in that limited environment. And I think that is the common thread of, to me at least, of successful developers, is that they all want to express something, whether it's through dance or music or code, whatever,
Yeah,
and so, and performance is one of those,
I can't remember if I've asked you this, but do you play any musical instruments?
No, I would love to. I mean, I can noodle around on a few. My son, I hate him. My son can pick up, literally, he can pick up any instrument, get a tune out of it in 10 minutes. By the end of the day, he could play in a band. He's like, I am exactly the opposite. But one of my problems is I've got a hole in my brain on one side, and I have never been able to split my hands. Well, like when I'm playing the piano, right?
Okay.
And my theory is it's because normally you've got left brain, right brain controlling the opposite sides of your body. And in mine, left brain, one side is handling both. Anyway, for whatever reason, I mean, I took piano lessons, failed miserably. I was practicing and practicing, couldn't do it. So my instructor, bless him, switched me across to composing instead. And I did that a lot. So I really enjoy writing music.
Right.
But I had to do it like one note at a time and sequence it.
Interesting. So you've still got the musical drive. You just maybe just not the mechanical aptitude for it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
How did you discover you got a massive hole in your brain?
About end of the 90s, I had some sinus problems. And so I went in to the doctor and they did I guess it was an MRI. And so they had the MRI. They don't give you the result in the day. And then they called us back in to see a specialist, my wife and I. So my wife and I come into the specialist office and we sit down. And the specialist turns to my wife and says, "So how's he doing?" And she said, "He's fine." And he was like, "Now, look, I need some background here. So did he go to school?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "What level of schooling did he achieve?" And she said, "Well, he got a first-class honors from London." He was like, "What?" And he looks at me strange. Wow. And I said, "And I can speak too." But yeah, so it turns out that I basically don't have a left temporal lobe in my brain.
Oh my goodness! Right. Okay.
I think it's just like an incredible testament to the plasticity of life that I found ways of adapting, and so, but learning that actually taught me a lot about, I have always had a really, really bad memory, like non-existent memory. And so my brain has compensated by creating an incredibly good, I have very bad recall memory. So my brain compensated by giving me incredibly good associative memory. So I can't, if you ask me, where were you on your birthday or something like that? No idea, right? A good example of that is my wife was away last week and I discovered I had a gap in my front teeth here. So I said to her, "I think I lost a tooth." And she said, "You lost that 3 years ago." So that's the kind of, anyway, but if you give me some context of something, I can draw this line all the way through it. It's really incredible.
Right.
So like when I was at school, I never took subjects, or I tried not to take subjects which involved memory, but something like physics or math, where there were just like underlying principles you could apply over and over and over in different ways. No problem at all. And I think,
well, and that's interesting. And so working as I do in like open source, it's very clear to me that the people who are sort of drawn into like software development, certainly the ones I see in software development, are oftentimes on the autistic spectrum or the ADHD spectrum, I guess it would also be. And so one of the things I learned quite early on about autism is that actually a lot of the people who have autism have complicated childbirths. And there are sort of like genetic markers, but there's also sort of these markers to do with the difficulty of the childbirth process. And it does make me wonder if, going back to your plasticity idea, that the idea that if you have these sort of traumatic brain things happening to you at a very early age, then other parts of your brain start to compensate and you develop certain skills which turn out later on to be very useful in our industry. So you came up with your hot take earlier about like Claude being much better if you're nice to it. I've got a couple of questions here for you. One of them is like kind of like reacting to your like simplicity mantra is like, I'm worried that AI is going to make programming much more complicated. So actually, I'm going to give you two examples. One is that, first of all, I ask it to solve a problem and it writes me 100 lines of code, whereas I could do it in 5 if I actually spent the time constructing those nice 5 lines of code. And I kind of feel like already that's creating technical debt, an extra complexity risk that I don't really want to have to manage. And so reining that in for me is kind of a lot of work, but reining that in for, your average punter who's just asking it to write a game or something is going to be difficult. But then the other thing that I think about is that, so that's a complexity risk argument. But the other thing is that by using all this AI code, we're using less open source. And one of the things that open source gives you is abstractions, useful abstractions. And when you discover a useful abstraction in open source, you publish it in a library and then other people can use it and refine it and make it better. But I kind of feel like we're moving away from that with all this vibe coding stuff now, and that people aren't going to be publishing as much open source. They'll just get the AI to do the thing and then move on. Whereas before that would be like, oh, hold on, I've got a great pattern here. Other people might find this useful. Let's put it out in the world. Sorry, that was a big data dump. But what do you think about that idea that we're going to end up in a more complex?
Yeah, I agree. So let's take it one at a time. Complexity risk is real. I mean, we can't ignore that. I think that is to some extent, a artifact of our current exuberance, right? There's this like tsunami of everything has to be AI. And so we all fall into that trap because it's so easy, and you allow it to get crazy. I have found that you can control it to some extent. There are refactoring skills that you can tell it to use every time it's finished writing code, and it goes through and fixes that. There's also the fact that I think that right now we're dealing with really the first generation of code generation AI. Second, I guess, but really it's really early days. And to some extent, the arguments that people are making now are the same as the arguments people made in the 1960s, that all of these newfangled compilers are never going to replace good assembler programmers, because they aren't going to produce the good kind of code that we're used to. And that was true for 10 years. And now there is no way a human being could beat a C compiler at generating assembler, right? Because it is infinitely better. Same thing with AI, I think, is that right now we have, in the same way early compilers, you say, I want to add 2 to A, and it would say, load A into a register, add 2, store it back, right? Nowadays, those are totally optimized out. AI is going to get that as well. And so AI will be able to optimize it. And the interesting thing is, I think, is that at some point, the optimizations that AI uses will make the code kind of unrecognizable to us. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. The interesting thing about that is that I got interested in why does Claude use English, and why is it writing JavaScript or whatever it might be, like JavaScript, right? Because wouldn't there be a more natural way for an AI to think about this? And it turns out that because the way they're trained, we actually did experiments. We did science, right? We actually ran tests, and we ran blind tests with AI generating code for other AI to read. And we found out that there are 5 or 6 very significant factors that affect the readability of code for an AI. Every single one of them was also a factor for people. So short functions, meaningful variable names, all of this kind of stuff, small modules, all of this helped AIs as much as it helped humans, and probably for the same reason in terms of attention again. So I think that over time, in order to make code better for AIs to use, AIs are going to have to write code that is better for everybody to read. AIs are evolving a good style for writing code. And it's interesting that that style is evolving kind of along the same lines that we have come to use.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested to watch what happens. At some point, they're going to diverge. At some point, it's going to come together and it's very close to the way we would write code. And then it's going to go further. And that's going to be where it gets to be. I hope I'm alive to see that, because that's going to be phenomenal, And at that point, they may well be saying, yeah, okay, I could express this differently if I had a language which allowed me to do 17 things in parallel, or whatever it might be. And then we'll see that change.
Yes, that would be interesting. I kind of, yeah, I kind of feel like we might be bumping up against, maybe it's not whole new languages, but there's like a CVE apocalypse going on at the moment where AI tools are just discovering new vulnerabilities left, right, and center.
Mm-hmm.
And well, so one of the answers, so in a way, like Java was an answer to memory leaks, and Rust was an answer to memory leaks, and people not managing memory properly in their code. And I kind of feel like we need a new language or some kind of new approach to manage CVEs now, so that somehow we can keep it. I don't know how this is going to work out, Dave, but I think just some way in which we can write code that is in some way helps us manage the CVEs in that code in some meaningful way, maybe using like sort of containment, like sort of virtualization, or like allowing bits of code to have certain permissions, this kind of thing. But I kind of feel like that might be something that comes out of this whole apocalypse at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually doing work right now with a company that is using AI for security analysis. On the kind of on
Are
the
you on the
on
bleeding
the
edge then?
I don't know about that, but it's really quite interesting. And they're one of the things they do is they have this agentic interface to their back end, right? So you can sit there and chat with an AI about ongoing issues that are happening. And because that is going to be programmable by the user, then what they have had to do is to they have a cluster of Talos instances, and Talos is a version of Unix that has been stripped to the point where it doesn't have a lot of I/O. You can't SSH into the box. It's just like a total sandbox environment. And that's the only way that they feel safe running code that's produced by these AIs. And maybe that's the way to go. Maybe we get into a world where everything is containerized and everything's safe that way. Maybe you're right. Maybe we should be auditing code better. But I think that's always, too late. And there needs to be a better way of writing language. I don't know if you can come up though with, it's like, what was there was a joke in Silicon Valley where they brought an AI online and they told it, fix all the bugs of the code, and it erased the code base.
Well, this isn't a joke. I think this is happening over and over again to lots of people every day at the moment.
And that's there is a trade-off there. You can't, if code doesn't have side effects, then it's not code. And so what do you do? I don't know. The second thing though you talked about was open source, and that is really interesting. I think, first of all, I think that if AI rewrites something or writes something from scratch because it's quicker than trying to integrate it, then it should do that. And I think there are a couple of reasons, but to me, okay, right now, the Pragmatic Bookshelf online store runs on a 12, 15-year-old version of Ruby on Rails. Because it
might not want to be telling everyone this.
The online store is not. It's the back-end admin system, and they can't get to that. But it is. It's a very old version. And recently, this week, one of the credit card interfaces that we have announced that they were no longer going to support the version of the library that we used because it's I can't remember, a security detail. So we kind of rushed to, so we rushed to upgrade it, but to upgrade it, we needed to upgrade the version of Ruby we're running and also the version of Rails we were running. And I have spent now 3 days in dependency hell, trying to fix that up.
Yes.
And I think that one of the problems with, and not the problem with open source, the problem with people being lazy is that they'll look around for off-the-shelf solutions to do things that were actually easier to do in the first place. Like there was that JavaScript vulnerability, like, I don't know when it was, 5-10 years ago, of the L strip. Remember that one?
I think, is it left pad you're thinking of?
Left pad, that's right. Left pad. Thank you. Not L strip, left pad. Yep. And and that stopped half the world working for a couple of days. And yet, if you look at it, it was 10 lines of code. It was 10 lines. Yeah. So that's ridiculous, building a dependency on something that is just so simple to write. I'm in two minds about, I mean, if my AI said, hey, I'm going to rewrite the relational database because, then I would say, don't be silly. But if it said, I'm going to rewrite this string handling library myself, why not?
Yeah.
Now, what does that do to open source? Well, open source, in my mind, has, for the last 10 years, needed a desperate change of philosophy, not from the people doing it, but from the people using it. Because the world now runs on open source. People make literally billions of dollars based off open source. And it's time that the world found a way of financing that.
Yes.
And if we can work out how that could work, then, for example, I think that the ability to open source skills, and which people are doing, is going to be as significant as open sourcing code. People are open sourcing models now. How they do that, I have no idea, but they're doing it. So I think open source as a concept is always going to be with us. The idea of open sourcing code may not.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I wonder, just sort of the inside track, I am working at Finos on this very problem at the moment. Because, as I say, there is this CVE apocalypse going on.
Yeah.
But, more in general, I think certainly some of our members at Finos have woken up to the fact that open source has been a free lunch for too long, and that with every free lunch, the bill, some kind of bill becomes due. And so they're starting to think, well, how can we help fund this and pay for it?
How can we examine? Okay, you talked earlier on about letting the AI write 100 lines of code that no one ever reads, right? And that being a liability. That's no different than if you npm install some package that you've never read, right? So in the same way that you have a obligation, I guess, to read the code that you've written with an AI, I think you have an obligation to do the same with your open source code. Not necessarily read it line by line, but have it audited somehow, point an AI at it and say, what vulnerabilities are there in this library that I'm about to use? Yeah.
Yeah. No, maybe I think this is definitely coming. Yeah.
Maybe that's what you could do from a Finos perspective. Maybe you could have some kind of badging ability so that you'll take an open source library, feed it through some CVE vulnerability AI, and if it passes, give it like a little Finos stamp of, as of this date, this is okay.
But one of the good things, obviously, is that, like you say, that analysis, like looking at a piece of open source and saying, is this fit for consumption? That operation has become a lot cheaper now. Like if I picked up like the Spring library and imported it into one of my projects, I haven't got time to read through every single line of it and look for vulnerabilities. However, if I added it as a dependency in my CI/CD pipeline, and then there was an AI fuzzer, like a fuzzer, right? That just went through and looked for all the vulnerabilities in my dependencies, that could probably run within the CI/CD pipeline in a few minutes and find stuff in novel libraries that might have been added to the build. And so actually, I think the cost of finding vulnerabilities is coming way down. And so I think like the problems we're going through right now in terms of like CVEs, in a few months, maybe by next year, we'll be in a whole different world and we'll be doing things in a different way, I'm sure. Because
think about early on in open source, right? People would just release a library and that would be it. And then pretty quickly, they discovered they had to put some kind of checksum on it, because otherwise other people would take that library and change it, right? So the checksum was designed to say, this library was not modified since I wrote it. So maybe there's now a second checksum, which is, if this software has this checksum, then it's been verified through this vulnerability detector.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing, of course, is SBOMs as well. People have been constructing SBOMs, and this is kind of difficult work, building SBOMs. But actually, getting an AI to help you build an SBOM starts to look a bit more tractable. The problem is like bits of code can get downloaded, and there's all sorts of different places the bits of code come from. Sometimes people will, like, copy paste stuff from an open source project into their closed source project. And it's like, well, what's the provenance of all of that? And so it gets really murky, but maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel here with some of this stuff where we can actually see a way through, in terms of software composition and vulnerabilities.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you about SBOMs as well, because that is, both from a liability point of view, but also from a reproducibility point of view. It's kind of nice to know what went into the software you're running.
Absolutely. So we haven't even talked about like the main part of your career, I think, is the Pragmatic Bookshelf, right? Which is how we came together in the first place. And I kind of feel like it would be remiss of me not to ask you some questions about that.
Okay.
And so did that started after like the Agile Manifesto, right? Your response was, I'm going to set up a bookshelf and like educate people, and it was through education.
No, that's way too altruistic.
What was the reasoning? Okay.
So no, what happened was, so Andy and I had been consulting together since 95 or 6 or something. Come 2000, I can't remember, 2001, 2002. We were talking about this earlier. The bottom dropped out, right? There was a big kind of like software developer recession, and consulting was the first budget to get hit. So we found work was drying up. I had, in the meantime, as a kind of passion project, written programming Ruby. I'd started doing that as we were doing Pragmatic Programmer, and I kind of finished it off in 2001, I think. No, 2000. And we used the same publisher for that. We used Pragmatic Programmer, Addison Wesley. But as with the Pragmatic Programmer, we did all of the typesetting ourselves, and we just gave them the finished PDFs, and they went off and did it. So it became clear that consulting was not going to cut it. And at the same time, Pragmatic Programmer deals with kind of concepts. We felt that there was a gap with basic skills. And in particular, there was a gap with people not using version control, not doing testing, and not using automation. So we said, okay, let's write 3 short books that cover those 3 things. Because we're kind of idle, we may as well do that. And at some point, some demon in one of our heads said, why don't we publish it ourselves? How hard could it be? And so we did. We found a printer, and we had the books shipped to our houses, and we fulfilled from our houses. Literally, I think he had it in the garage as well. We both just shipped out of our garages. And it kind of grew from there. Andy and I wrote the first 2 books. Mike Clark wrote the automation book. And people said, oh, they're now publishing books. I've got a book I want to write. And so we got deluged with people wanting to write books. And it just kind of grew, it wasn't supposed to do the dominant thing, but yeah, for the next 15, 16 years, that was my life, was a book publisher. Which was actually really good fun, because I got to meet a whole range of people I wouldn't have met, like you, and got to work on a whole bunch of problems that I really wish didn't exist, to do with publishing and the way the industry works and everything else. So the bookshelf didn't start as some grand vision to educate the masses. It was really just, we got some books we want to write. Let's try.
That is interesting. I kind of felt like it was driven by like a more noble cause.
Well, no, okay.
You know what? That's still a better cause than just like, oh, here's an easy way to make money. It's but I think you still
there is a tacit noble cause.
Yes,
and that was the rule we set very early on, that we would only publish books that we thought were good. So most book publishers they work a bit like venture capitalists, right? They have thousands of projects that make a loss, and then every now and then they have a bestseller. And no one can predict the bestseller. So the only way to do it is to diversify and go through a crap ton of books until you finally get the one that hits. And we didn't want to do that. Because it was our names on the books. Everybody knew it was us. So we wanted to have books that we would stand behind. So in a way, that was naive, but in another way, I think it defined the business.
Yeah, it's certainly got a really good reputation from all the people I talked to about it. I was going to ask you like loads of sort of risk-based questions about like running a publishing company, but I don't want to do that now because I think you're kind of moving on. But I was going to say one of the kind of the latest things is like, again, AI is impacting publishing. And I see this like the other, like I can just go onto ChatGPT now and say, give me a recipe for blah, and it'll spit out a recipe for like vegan pancakes or whatever it is. And I think this is sort of reinventing our sort of relationship with text. But there are lots of risks around this, and I just wanted to get your kind of take on that.
Absolutely. And I think, first of all, I'm here to tell you that AI has totally destroyed the book business. The nonfiction book business. I mean, across the board, sales are down 30% annually, particularly in tech titles, because those are the people using AI the most. And I think that is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's put me out of business, but I mean, it's still, it's evolution of the industry, and that's the way it's going to go. The thing that scares me the most is that the knowledge that AIs have right now is based on reading the last 20 years of stuff, right? And they are phenomenally good at that. I see companies that say we don't need junior developers anymore because the AIs will do the junior work. We just need people to guide the AIs, the senior devs. So my question is, where are the senior devs going to come from 5 years from now? And where is the new knowledge that the AIs should be able to absorb coming from 5 years from now? And that is the thing which I know people are talking about it, but which is kind of being brushed under the rug right now. And we really need to surface that, because I think that is a existential risk, not just to software, but to the world, that we risk stagnation if we let this go too long. And stagnation is the equivalent of death when it comes to societies.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's kind of what I was driving at as well, because the process of writing a book is hard work. And you've been through it a number of times. I've been through it a couple of times. And what you're doing is you're honing ideas and messages and thoughts into something like diamond, essentially. You're trying to really condense down knowledge. But AI has none of the access to the ground truth that you're using to do that. It's just regurgitating stuff that already exists on the internet. So we're cutting off the connection to the ground truth of knowledge and where it's coming from, which I think is really dangerous. I agree with you.
I mean, just because I have that kind of brain, I mean, I also argue against that myself, because one of the other things to think about is, how do you and I come by that knowledge? I mean, I think that the mechanisms by which AIs think and the mechanisms by which we think are actually closer than most people realize. I think we tend to react to stimuli by building patterns and then somehow, externalizing the patterns that we've seen. So you could also argue that we as a race have been doing that same kind of thing, and we've been doing quite nicely, thank you. So it's possible, I guess, that AIs will, as they get more sophisticated, be able to do that kind of speculative synthesis that you're talking about. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see how that goes. I'm aware that we're kind of at time now. So are there any places people should come and see you in the future, or any podcasts you listen to, or what have you got anything else you'd just like to conclude with?
I, at the risk of tooting a horn, I'm actually doing a Substack right now, which I'm
cool.
going to bring back to life this week, in fact, where I just pontificate every now and then. So you definitely need to be reading that. That's the most important thing in your life. For the rest of it, I tend to be, I don't like kind of idolatry, and so I don't typically like following people who are kind of like flaring up at the moment. My own rule is that I'll just do a really thin level surface read across a whole bunch of stuff, And I look for things that pop up more than 3 times over a couple of weeks. Something deep that pops up.
Yeah.
And if it occurs 3 times, then I go, oh, okay, that's worth researching. And I put it on my list of things to look at. And that's kind of like my way of dealing with the deluge. But I think the other thing to say is that as the world gets more and more complicated, I think it becomes more and more important to realize that you only get one shot at it. And the key thing is to do what interests you, to look at the whole world and look at all the things that are going on and saying, that's interesting. I'll go spend some time with that. Right? I think trying to have a plan for life is like having a plan for programming, right? It just doesn't work. So have an agile life, and take small steps. And the ideal is you take small steps that are undoable if you've made a mistake, and use feedback, and then do what's fun.
That's great advice. Nice one, Dave. That's great. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.